Welcome to this video from the Consultants Development Institute. If you've already seen any of the videos in this series, then I ask your patience as I repeat some information now that you've already heard. For some viewers, this might be their first video. I'm Priscilla Watson, and I'm presenting the CDI course, Perspectives on Change in Organizations. In this video, we'll first clear up some language about change. We'll give you a perspective on change by explaining the different types or categories of change that you might be working with. There can be many barriers and surprises during change, and we'll describe each of those, including the phases needed in a change process to overcome the barriers and surprises. There are many of what we call models for change that you might learn and use in your work. It helps to look at a wide range of capacity-building activities or consulting services as methods for accomplishing change. We'll list many of the most common activities and how they're selected. Then we'll discuss some very wise principles to know when working to change any system. Like many of the topics, we'll give you a handout you can use to bring the principles with you in your consulting projects. We'll go on to suggest where to focus for your own effectiveness during projects and where clients should focus. We'll end by suggesting how best to design an overall change management plan and what should be in that plan. It seems there's been an explosion of literature about organizational change. It ranges from highly philosophical and anecdotal to detailed and research-based. This literature is written by researchers, writers, educators, and practitioners. So it's useful to put this video in perspective. Like the other CDI courses, the focus of this course is on the foundational knowledge needed by consultants to plan and guide change in any organization. The information is for specialists and generalists, external and internal consultants. This knowledge is useful as it applies to different roles in consulting. For example, the advisor, coach, facilitator, trainer, or mentor. That includes those who facilitate board development and strategic planning. Board members and strategic planners especially need to understand the nature of change in organizations, including the best practices in designing and implementing that change. You can evolve this knowledge into new skills and abilities by taking CDI's program on organizational consulting. There's a program for working with for-profits and nonprofits. See the website at consultantsdevelopmentinstitute.org for more information. When a topic like change becomes so very prominent, it often takes on many different interpretations and meanings. We'll define some phrases used in this video. First, let's define the phrase organizational change. This phrase refers to the overall nature of activities to enhance performance in an organization. The activities are often led by a change agent or a person currently responsible to guide the overall change effort. The activities are often, but not always, conducted during a one-time project that is geared to address a current problem or goal in the organization. The phrase change management refers to using a certain method to ensure that the organizational change effort is indeed successful. The activities in change management can range from a planned, structured, and explicit approach to an unplanned, disorganized, and implicit approach. Let's look at the phrase organizational performance management. As we learned in the previous course about performance in organizations, performance management includes the recurring activities to establish goals, monitor progress, and make adjustments to achieve those goals more effectively and efficiently. Unlike one-time organizational change projects, the activities of organizational performance management are recurring in nature. The phrase change agent refers to the person who is currently responsible for the overall change effort. The role can be performed by different people at different times. For example, an internal consultant might first perform the role, but work in such a way that the role ultimately is adopted by someone else inside the organization. The phrase organizational development refers to the evolution of the organization during the activities of organizational change. For example, the evolution of its members to be able to resolve a major problem or do a recurring function in the organization. Organizational development is an outcome of the activities of organizational change. Organization development is a field of research, theory, and practice dedicated to expanding the knowledge and effectiveness of people to accomplish more successful organizational change and performance. Different people often have different perspectives on the field, depending on their particular values and skills. You and your client can prepare for the scope and complexity of change by knowing the type of change that you're facing. We'll describe them and compare them to each other. The first type of change is organization-wide versus subsystem. Examples of organization-wide change might be a major restructuring or a change in culture. Examples of a change in a subsystem might include the addition or removal of a certain product or service, or a reorganization of a certain department. Focus on the overall organization will need to integrate goals of subsystems and the external environment. Focus on a subsystem will require alignment with subsystems around it. Transformational versus incremental. Transformational change is a radical and fundamental change in the organization. An example might be changing an organization's overall structure and culture from the traditional top-down hierarchical structure to self-organizing teams. Examples of incremental change might be a continuous improvement program or implementing a new computer system. Transformational change should involve as many stakeholders as possible in the change effort. Remedial versus developmental. Remedial change is intended to remedy a current problem, for example, to improve the poor performance of a product or reduce burnout in the workplace. Remedial projects often seem more focused and urgent because they're addressing a current major problem. The goal of developmental change is to make a successful situation even more successful. For example, to expand the amount of customers or to duplicate a successful service. Developmental change can be very difficult. It can be a big challenge to believe in the need for the change. Unplanned versus planned. Unplanned change can happen when a surprise occurs, such as the CEO suddenly leaving. That could cause employees to respond in a highly reactive and disorganized fashion. Unplanned change also can occur over time, as employees just naturally show up for work and do whatever is necessary for the day. Planned change occurs when leaders in the organization recognize the need for a major change and then proactively organize an explicit and systematic plan to accomplish the change. Experts assert that planned change is more successful than unplanned change because it's systematic and includes sufficient communication to sustain buy-in to the change effort. It helps to know what barriers you and your client might encounter when designing a project for change. Information about barriers also gives you ideas about what to ask your client when discerning their readiness for a major project for change. This course includes handouts to assess barriers and readiness. Perhaps the biggest barrier to change is fear of the unknown. People are often threatened by change. They'd rather keep things the way they are, despite the problems that they're facing. People might communicate their fear through direct means such as complaining about the plans for change. Or they might communicate their fear indirectly, for example, by not attending meetings about the change. Another barrier is strong conflicts or disagreements about the change. For example, some people might not believe that there's enough of a problem to warrant any change at all, or they might disagree with the proposed methods to accomplish the change. They might disagree with an approach that seems to cost a lot of money at a time when the company is working hard to reduce expenses. The client might not be ready for major change. People in the organization are already extremely busy, or there aren't sufficient resources to participate in a major project for change at this point. Another barrier is lack of effective leadership. Leaders might disagree on whether there is even a problem, or on what should be done about it. Even if they do agree, they might not be able to convince their employees that the leaders really believe in the need for change. Some organizations have a history of starting projects but not finishing them. It could be argued that those organizations have a problem with poor leadership. Those organizations might be better off to start a project to develop stronger leadership skills. Cynicism can be a big reason for a project to not be successful. For example, many people might be getting rather tired of the term change because it's so widely mentioned in literature and life. Cynical people might believe that their leaders aren't really sincere when they roll out a new project for change. Even if there are major problems in an organization, people still might not want change because they're very satisfied with the status quo. This system might occur if the leaders in the organization have not adequately communicated the real need for the change, or if the problems in the organization just don't seem all that significant to people. In addition to barriers that can hurt a project for change, there can also be some major surprises. In a project for change, there are usually several key personnel involved. If any of them leave, that can stall or completely stop a project. For example, if the CEO suddenly leaves, then the project might be postponed until a new CEO is hired. That can take a long time. The original reason for the change might suddenly change. For example, if you were hired to facilitate a strategic planning process, but soon found that the members of the board of directors did not have sufficient leadership to make decisions during planning, that project would be better suited to a board development project. Occasionally, especially if you have not been working in a collaborative fashion with your client, your working relationship can begin to sour. That can have a very detrimental effect on your project if suddenly your client quits cooperating with you. An organization might encounter a major opportunity that warrants putting the project on hold or stopping it altogether. For example, a new market might suddenly open up, or an investor might approach your client with a new opportunity. A project can be so poorly planned and resourced that it reaches a tipping point where the employees simply stop cooperating. A collaborative approach to consulting rarely results in that kind of surprise. You are most likely to overcome barriers and surprises if you use a planned approach to change. That approach should include the following phases to ensure that the change is successful. Cummings and Worley, in their book, Organizational Development and Change, describe a comprehensive, 5-phase process for successfully managing change. Whatever process you choose to use when guiding change, it should include the following 5 phases: motivating change, creating vision, developing support, managing transition, and sustaining momentum. You might recognize that these phases for change are somewhat similar to the phases in the collaborative consulting process that we described in an earlier CDI course. Actually, the phases in the overall collaborative consulting process can be used to implement the following phases for a successful change process. The phases for change are all highly integrated, and each should be fully implemented. If a project for change seems stalled or stopped altogether, then you might need to cycle back to an earlier phase for change to give that phase even more attention. There will be different priorities for leadership in each phase, as we'll mention in the coming slides. This course includes a handout with all of the basic guidelines for accomplishing successful change. The first phase for change is creating the strong motivation for the change. That includes clarifying the strong need to solve the problem or achieve the goal. In this phase, it's very important to enlighten employees about the need for the change. For example, to be very clear about any current major problems or exciting opportunities, and how employees will benefit from addressing them. Explain that the change will be planned and systematic. Acknowledge any previous plans for the change and whether or not they were successful. If they were not successful, then admit it, and explain how the new plans will be different from the old ones. Don't simply ignore what happened in the past. Be authentic with employees. Stress that your plans will be relevant and realistic. Don't exaggerate your plans and their intended results in an attempt to somehow energize your people. Employees are likely to see through that kind of overblown approach, and if the project does not soon reach those kinds of exhilarating proportions, they might become very disappointed and cynical, and even quit cooperating. It's very helpful to motivate change by assuring employees that they will have strong input to the current plans and to their implementation. People naturally have a fear of the unknown, so help them to know what is going on and why, and what is expected of them. In this phase, leaders should show strong, visible support for the change. They should share the benefits of the change with employees and explain what they're doing to support the project, such as obtaining sufficient resources and allocating funds. Leaders should also convey clear expectations, assigning responsibilities to certain personnel, along with the results that personnel are expected to achieve by certain deadlines. The second phase for change is about creating a vision for clarity and purpose, and also for inspiration and motivation. Be sure that your client is very involved in this phase. The vision is most powerful if it involves the input of as many stakeholders as possible, especially those who will be responsible for achieving the vision. Visions that are simply imposed upon people are not nearly as powerful as those that represent the participation and ownership of everyone involved. Leaders in the organization must depict a vision that clearly conveys the benefits of the project to the organization, to its employees, and its customers. Will the vision accomplish higher profits or expansion of markets? Will it benefit the community even more? Will employees get more resources to do their jobs? The vision should depict what success is. The vision might be associated with several subordinate phases or goals that together will achieve the vision. For example, if the project is to evolve from a traditional top-down hierarchy to self-managed teams, describe the stages of the transitions and when they will occur. The vision should be motivational yet realistic. For example, it's useful to depict a grand vision that might be years out, along with a realistic strategic vision that describes what the organization will look like in the near future, right after the plan for change has been implemented. Be sure that the vision is focused on changes in strategies and structures, not just on changing people. Organizations must continually adapt to a changing world, and that means changes in strategy. Changes in strategy must be supported by structures, plans, and policies, not only changes to people. In this phase, leaders should ensure all members of the organization feel that they have input to the vision. Without their understanding, commitment, and participation, it's very difficult to achieve any vision. Leaders should also ensure that people feel that the change is relevant, that it's not just change for the sake of change. They should feel that the organization and its changes are being realistic. The third phase is developing political support for the change. If this phase is overlooked, it can prevent an intended change from ever occurring. Again, your client should be very involved in this phase. Ask your client, are all of the necessary power players involved in developing the vision? Will they support it? Explain that the power players have power by virtue of the respect and influence that they have in the workplace. They have the most influence in convincing people of the need for the project and in getting the resources that it needs to succeed. Any change effort must conform to the culture of the organization. It's extremely important that the nature of the project be suitable to the current culture of the organization, even if the project is intended to cultivate a different culture later on. If it isn't suitable, then it won't be accepted. Understand the current culture. For example, do people highly value getting things done? If so, build in quick successes to the plan for change. Do they highly value relationships? If so, then have even more communications and meetings about the plans and the implementation of those plans. Celebrate accomplishments in the project. In this phase, leaders should build coalitions and agreement among the power players, including ongoing communications with them and continually soliciting their input. Leaders should also be very careful never to complain about the demands of the project or its effects. Employees who are already feeling overworked or skeptical about the project will very likely begin bad-mouthing it. The fourth phase for successful change is managing the transition. This can be quite a challenge for your client. The nature of the transition phase moves from one of hope and inspiration to managing details and schedules during the project. This is the phase where action plans are implemented. The plans are aligned with the vision and specify who is going to do what and by when. These plans should be carefully analyzed to be sure they're realistic and integrated. Accountabilities and deadlines should be assigned for each goal or objective. Action plans are much more likely to be successfully implemented if they've been integrated into current operations. For example, responsibilities for action plans might be included in the current job description and performance goals. Meetings to review the project plans could be done during regularly scheduled staff meetings. Since this is the phase where people might be asked to do more, it's not unlikely that performance issues might arise. For example, people might already be behind schedule on their regular work, which could cause new projects to be even further behind schedule. It's very important to closely investigate the causes of those issues. They might be from lack of resources or training, or from lack of understanding of the project. In this phase, leaders should delegate to employees, clearly conveying the desired results, but leaving it up to the employee as to how those results can be achieved. Effective delegation produces much more commitment and participation from employees. Leaders should now focus more on execution. For example, are the necessary goals and milestones being achieved on time? If not, then why not? What should be done to get back on schedule? Leaders should also be evaluating the impact of the project so far. For example, is the overall vision being achieved? And if so, what difference is it making in the organization or the subsystem being worked on? The final phase is sustaining momentum. Here's where your skills in coaching can be very useful, as we learned in the previous CDI course, Coaching Conversations. This phase is often the most difficult. Now the effects of prolonged implementation start to manifest themselves. If the expectations of the most cynical or skeptical people are not being met, they become disenchanted with the project and their participation wanes. This is also the prolonged phase where the most surprises can occur, such as a new priority that's much more important than the one being addressed by the project. Key personnel may leave the organization. Plans are rarely implemented exactly as planned, so during this phase, be willing to change the plans, but be reluctant to change them frequently, especially if the changes seem necessary because the project has stalled or stopped altogether. Instead, focus on the reasons for those problems and then promptly address them. If you have to change the plan, do so systematically. Clearly mark the changes in the plan document and distribute new versions of the plan. Explain why the changes were needed. In this phase, leaders should use coaching to sustain momentum when project activities seem to be stalled or stopped. Good coaching is based on asking good questions. For example, we're behind schedule. What do you think we should do about it? How can we be sure we'll get back on track? How can you make that happen? Good coaching also makes sure that people are learning while they're getting coached. Another good coaching question is, what have we learned from this situation, and what can we do differently next time? Leaders should continually communicate status to everyone involved. Others need to understand what's being done and why. They need to feel that their continuing involvement is very important. Leaders should also celebrate successes. People need to soon see and feel progress. Respond to those successes with acknowledgement and praise. Now's a good time to pause and reflect on what you've heard so far. In your learning journal, answer the following questions. What are the most frequent kinds of barriers that you face in projects for change, and what do you do to get through them? Or, if you're new to consulting, then what kinds of barriers are you most concerned about facing in the future, and how might you get through those? What phase of change might be the most challenging for you to get through with your kinds of clients or the kinds of clients that you will likely work with? How might you get through that phase? Pause the video and give this some thought. Perhaps discuss these questions with peers and then write your answers in your journal. Numerous models for change have been developed. There are carefully designed and comprehensive approaches to diagnosing organizations and suggesting what can be done to address the results. It's useful to look at a list of models that you might consider. The list itself might open your mind to other options. First, we'll look at Kurt Lewin's model, unfreeze, move, and refreeze. Structures can be unfrozen or loosened up in a variety of ways. By enlightening members of the organization about the gap between where they are now and where they could be. The change is moved along primarily by cultivating new knowledge, skills, and perspectives among members. The system is refrozen by implementing new structures such as new plans, policies, and procedures, which freeze the current state of change in place. Lewin's action research process is based on an overall cycle of researching a situation to establish actions to take, taking those actions, and then learning from the actions. The process has been modified many times and often includes certain steps, such as clarifying the problem in the system, involving a specialist, diagnosing the situation, providing feedback, incorporating the feedback, establishing action plans, taking actions, and assessing the effects on the problem. Business process reengineering aims to increase organizational performance by radically redesigning the organization's structures and processes. The process starts from the ground up. It involves very detailed depiction and analysis of every process in the organization and then implements adjustments to more effectively align the processes. Marvin Weisbord's Future Search Conference engages all key stakeholders in a multi-day working session designed to better align the organization with its external environment. Participants examine the past, present, and future of the organization from their perspective, the perspective of the organization and its industry. They discover shared values and assumptions to clarify a preferred future or vision. Short-term and long-term action plans are established. Emphasis is on building to the desired future rather than on solving the problems. The McKinsey 7S model depicts 7 dimensions of organizations that must be considered when accomplishing organizational change. To understand the model, imagine 6 circles arranged in a circle with 1 circle in the middle. The middle circle is labeled Shared Values. The 6 outer circles include strategy, structure, systems, skills, staff, and style. The point of the model is that an effective organization has to accomplish a fit between all 7 S's, and to realize that a change in any one of the 7 dimensions will affect and change in all of the others. In any planned change effort with your clients, you will want to fill the following roles. They can be filled by different individuals or groups at different times during the change process. Sometimes individuals or groups can fill more than one role. The change initiator is the person who first suggests the strong need for the change. She might have convinced others that there's a significant problem or an exciting opportunity facing the organization. Often the person who initiates the change is not the person who becomes the primary change agent. The change agent is the person responsible for guiding the overall change effort. This role can be filled by different people at different times. An internal consultant might be the first change agent. After the project begins implementation, that role might be filled by a team of employees. If the change effort stalls out, the change agent might be a top leader in the organization who intercedes to ensure continued process in the effort. The champion for change is a person or group who continues to build and sustain strong enthusiasm during the change. They remind everyone of why the change is occurring in the first place and the many benefits that have come and will come from that change. The champion role might be filled by the change agent or later on by a leader in the organization. The sponsor of change is the one key internal person or department that is officially responsible for coordinating the change project. In large organizations, that sponsor might be someone in human resources, strategic planning, or information technology. In smaller organizations, the sponsor might be a team of senior leaders. They work to ensure that the change effort stays on schedule and is sustained with ongoing resources and training. In an earlier course, we learned about the big picture in organizations and systems, and that leadership is the engine that drives the activities in the system. Leadership is most influential when it comes from people in management positions, but everyone in an organization can lead, if only in leading themselves for change. Significant change in an organization will not be successful unless it has the strong, visible, and ongoing support of leadership during the entire change effort. All employees in a corporation, including the CEO, ultimately work for the board of directors. In projects for significant change in small to medium-sized corporations, the board can be the leverage point, that is, the point where the least effort can make the biggest difference. Board members have full authority for allocating all resources for the organization, such as people, time, and money. Allocation shows strong political support for the change, which can sustain strong, ongoing motivation and momentum for the change. Board members often have a wide variety of knowledge about governing the organization, such as planning, leadership, management, supervision, and problem solving. They usually have strong knowledge of the organization's industry and marketplace. That knowledge can be very useful during a project for significant change in the organization. Board members are usually not involved in the day-to-day activities of a project, so they have a very objective view of the activities inside the organization. That perspective can be very useful when monitoring and evaluating the results of a project for change. One of the primary jobs of the board is to ensure accountability, that the corporation has clear purpose and priorities and is always working toward them. During the discovery and the action planning phases of the collaborative consulting cycle, you and your clients decide which activities will be used to solve the problem or achieve the goal. You have a wide variety of activities to choose from. We'll highlight just a few of the most common for you now. The list might be useful for you and your client to consider. Assessments are a very powerful way to make a difference in your client's organization, because it actively involves people in thinking hard about what's going on in the organization and what might be done to make things even better. In some of the earlier CDI courses, we talked about how coaching conversations can be extremely powerful to bring out wisdom from people and to cultivate their strong participation in activities for change. We also talked about facilitation as a powerful approach to get those same results, but with groups. Financial analysis is also very useful for detecting problems in an organization. Problems with finances are often symptoms of other more strategic activities. Leadership development is very common now, because without effective leadership in an organization, little or no change can occur. Mentoring is also very popular today because it allows more experienced people to share their strong knowledge and expertise with others in the organization. Product and program development are a prized set of services from consultants. If products and programs are not successful, then it probably won't matter what else is successful in the organization. Risk management is increasingly popular as social media has become so universal, and the public is much less patient with unethical dealings. Strategic planning can be transformational when the right model of planning is implemented in the right way. Team building is a common way to strengthen performance in the workplace because most work gets done in teams. You and your client might use a variety of ways to select which types of capacity building activities to use. In their book, Building the Capacity of Capacity Builders, Paul Connolly and Peter York suggest that the type of activities that you choose depends on certain factors. First, the client should have the resources to use the activities. Resources include time, skills, expertise, money, facilities, and equipment. Your client should also have the organizational readiness to use those resources. Readiness includes having the time to participate, but also the understanding and commitment to use the activities. In the earlier CDI course about the big picture in organizations, we talked about life cycles in organizations and systems. The current life stage should affect the choice of capacity building activities to use now. For example, new organizations need activities to create new systems, while more mature organizations need activities to be more efficient. Your choice of activities also depends very much on your own expertise as a consultant to guide your client through those activities. For example, your skills in advising, coaching, facilitating, and training. Experts in systems have identified numerous principles about how systems work and how to change them. These principles are the wisdom that guide you and your client to plan and implement changes in any system. One of the best descriptions of systems principles is in Peter Senge's book, The Fifth Discipline, and Draper Kaufman's book, Systems 1, An Introduction to Systems Thinking. The following principles are adapted from those publications. These principles also are listed in the handout for this course. The first principle is that the behavior of a system, such as an organization or a team, depends on its entire structure. For example, if you examine business planning without examining the closely related strategic planning, then the organization might be no better off than they were before. Some people might claim that this principle is not followed when consultants focus only on the people side or only on the business side of the system, and not on both sides. There is a circular relationship between the overall system and its parts. Ever notice how some organizations and people experience a recurring pattern of the same problems? For example, some organizations are always in financial crisis. Wise and experienced leaders soon focus on fixing the pattern rather than just the events that occur in them. For example, they cut back on expectations or extend deadlines, rather than a never-ending process of raising more money. Structures determine behaviors, which determine events. In the language of systems, a structure is a recurring pattern in a system. A classic example is the alcoholic whose recurring drinking behaviors continue to ruin his life. People who are uninformed about alcoholism tend to preach at him to stop those behaviors. They don't focus at all on the aspects of the recurring patterns in his life, that is, on his continuing need to drink, his recurring drinking, and the increasing damage to his life, all of which reinforces his continuing need to drink, until there is an effective intervention in the overall pattern. A very useful principle is that there is no blame. When issues recur in an organization, it's common that people become so frustrated that they begin blaming each other. Wise leaders understand that recurring pattern and focus on fixing it rather than blaming the people involved. Actually, when those systems are fixed, the most irritating and problematic people often become the best. Problems in a system are usually best solved one level above the problem. We explored that principle in the earlier course on the big picture in organizations. For example, problems with cash flow might be caused by problems with sales. Problems with sales might be caused by problems in marketing. Problems with marketing might be caused by problems with business planning, and so on. Let's look at some more principles for changing systems. Recurring problems in a system are usually caused by the interrelationships between the parts of the system rather than by a particular part. If strategic planning did not integrate the goals that were relevant to all departments in an organization, then problems can occur within each of the departments. For example, sales might suffer for one product that is actually conflicting with another. Long-lasting change comes from changes to structures in the system. For example, new supervisors often try to change the performance of their employees merely by preaching at them. Wise supervisors have learned that to get long-lasting performance from employees, the employees need clear roles, goals, and expectations from their supervisors. Today's problems are often yesterday's solutions. The quick fixes of today often make things far worse tomorrow. For example, if organizations struggle with financial problems, then it won't do much good to continue to borrow money from investors. Instead, the organization should reduce goals, extend deadlines, or reduce expenses. The harder you push at changing a system, the harder the system will push back. For example, it does little good to tell burned-out employees to just suck it up and do a better job. Their performance will just get worse because they'll feel more frustration, anger, and despair. Rather than pushing at them with dire warnings, first come from them. That is, listen to them about their frustrations and needs. That approach is much more likely to recognize the causes of the burnout and what can be done about it. The last principle that we'll mention is that our favorite way out usually just leads right back in. When we have recurring problems, we often resort to doing what we were doing already. We just do it even harder. For example, visionary leaders of new organizations often operate in a highly reactive mode, and they loathe what they call bureaucracy. However, as the organization becomes more successful, it needs internal systems to provide the efficiencies to support that growth. When those systems aren't developed, workers are expected to work even harder. Unwise leaders begin to blame the workers for not being more loyal. Wise leaders work smarter. They shore up the internal systems instead. It's not uncommon for consultants to be so focused about their clients and their consulting projects that they forget about taking care of themselves as human beings and as professional consultants. The following guidelines address the most important aspects of guiding yourself during the sometimes complex and challenging projects for change. The guidelines are also in the handout for this course. First, manage your time and stress. This is probably the most important guideline for you to follow, because if you become stressed out, your perspective on everything else will suffer. Remember that your nature, your biases, and your consulting style can have a tremendous effect on others. Remember from the CDI course, Understanding Yourself as Consultant, that you are an instrument of change. Remember how to use that instrument. Always adhere to your own personal values and ethics. If you lose your moral compass during a project, then your perspective on everything else suffers, especially during a very complex and dynamic change project. Change is often unpredictable, so have at least one explicit and systematic change model in mind. Even if you do not implement the model completely, that model can serve as a common frame of reference for communicating with your client. Continue building trust, commitment, and collaboration with your client. Skills in multiculturalism, authenticity, communication, coaching, and in managing expectations will be particularly useful to you. Now let's look at more guidelines for taking care of yourself as a professional consultant during challenging projects for change. Get ongoing feedback from people outside of your consulting projects. For example, get a mentor or a group of consultants to share ongoing fresh perspectives on life and work. Otherwise, you can get too close to your client situations and get lost in them. Continue your own personal and professional development. You can follow every guideline for accomplishing successful change in systems, but those guidelines won't be useful unless you're also changing yourself. Have at least a basic understanding of the range of other types of consulting services in organizations. Know when to ask for help in a project and what types of services to suggest to your clients. Do not try to control change during the project, but instead to guide it. Plans will change as you and your client continue to learn and to take actions together. Let the plans change, but change them systematically, and then communicate those changes to relevant stakeholders in the project. While you're taking care of yourself personally and professionally, help your clients with some of their obligations too. Early in the project, you and your client should consider these guidelines. Your client must guarantee sufficient resources to implement the plan for change. Far too often, the plan for change results in your client having to do even more than they were doing. Your client becomes completely overwhelmed, and the change effort fails altogether. Plans for change must be very realistic and include sufficient resources. As we talked about in previous CDI courses, your client needs to be ready to participate in a project for change. You can assess their readiness by asking some questions. Do they have the resources for the project? What obstacles do they foresee? Might other people be uncomfortable with the project? And is your client open to other perspectives? Ultimately, it is a judgment call on your part and on your client's as to whether or not your client is really ready for the project. By the way, the CDI program, Organizational Consulting, teaches you how to do a very effective readiness test with your clients. Your client's top leadership must show continued support for the project. They could show strong visible support in the form of speeches and memorandum about the need for the project, along with their actual participation in parts of the project. Some experienced consultants even ask for the signatures of the board president and the chief executive officer on a consulting contract as a visible means of verifying their initial support of the project. Your client must always take strong ownership of the change process. Inexperienced consultants sometimes compensate for their initial insecurities by doing the vast majority of project work themselves. While that approach might quickly generate results in the project, it rarely generates the kind of client ownership that is necessary for them to successfully change. The collaborative approach to consulting does produce that kind of ownership. Your client must trust you, and you must trust your client. Mistrust cultivates conflict, and conflict cultivates poor communication. Those two issues create a vicious cycle that can destroy the consulting relationship. The way to cultivate trust is for you and your client to authentically participate with each other, to be as honest, direct, and respectful as possible with each other in the here and now of the project. Projects for change at any level in the organization can seem very broad and complex. It can be challenging to know where to continue to focus the activities in the project. You and your client should consider the following guidelines. First, begin talking from the perspective of organizational performance. If your client begins talking about the need to reduce conflicts and turnover, or to implement a certain process in the organization, then begin by asking how those activities will increase the performance of the particular business unit and the overall organization. Next, be sure to integrate the goals of the project with the goals of the organization. If the goals of the organization have not been clearly articulated, it is very beneficial to get your client to begin thinking about how those organizational goals could be made more clear. Their thinking might also apply to the clarity of your project's goals. Always focus activities on success for the project and define success early on in the project. As we discussed in the course Standards, Principles, and Risks, success can mean many things to many different people. For example, success might be achieving certain goals in the project, or it might mean keeping the budget or meeting the deadline. It might mean maintaining a strong relationship with clients. Whatever success is to the project, ensure that project activities are always focused on achieving those conditions for that success. If the definitions and the conditions need to change, then have an authentic discussion with your client and perhaps redo the original consulting contract for the project. Focus on the causes, not the symptoms of the problem. For projects that are designed to solve problems in your client's organization, as opposed to achieving more forward-looking developmental goals, ensure that you identify both the presenting problems and the real causes of those issues. Project plans should be focused on the real causes of issues. The discovery phase of the collaborative consulting process will separate symptoms from causes. Focus on major organizational parts and their relationships. As we talked about earlier, problems in organizations are seldom completely addressed by attending to only one part of the organization. When identifying action plans during a project, consider any effect on each major part of the organization, and especially how plans will affect relationships between the parts. Let's continue to look at where your project should always be focusing. Focus on changing the structures in the system, not only on changing personalities. While this suggestion might sound obvious, it is surprising how often people try to cultivate change primarily by preaching at people and expecting them somehow to change. If there are recurring problems in the organization, analyze the recurring patterns that are involved in causing those problems. Focus on changing that pattern or structure. Focus on the first 20% of activities that generate the first 80% of progress toward the goal. In most complex things in life, there's an initial 20% of effort that produces 80% of results, whether it's learning a new job or writing a book. Far too often, we dwell on the remaining 80% that generates only 20% of results. Instead, in your projects for change, focus first on the initial 20% of effort. The previous course about the big picture in organizations explained that attention to strategic and business planning often addresses symptoms seen in the ongoing operating activities. So focus first on those overall activities for planning. Build from strengths at least as much as, if not more than, from weaknesses. This approach helps you ensure that your current action plans are based on your client's current abilities. Focus on getting some quick successes in the project. Quick successes help to ensure credibility for the project, enthusiasm among participants for project plans, and momentum for ongoing project activities. Examples of quick successes might include development of various plans, completion of planning meetings, generation of major reports, and identification of useful learning. It is surprising how often personnel can get focused so much on the project that they do harm to the products, programs, and services that are currently generating needed revenue. Early in the project, work with your client to identify which activities are off limits while working on the project. Now let's look at this last set of guidelines about where your project's activities must continue to focus. Schedule project activities to occur on a timely basis. Activities should not occur too slowly so as to be obsolete by the time they are conducted. Nor should they occur too fast, which can cause chaos and a whole new array of associated problems. One of the best ways to ensure that actions occur on a timely basis is to work collaboratively with your client to develop and implement plans. Integrate results throughout the organization. Project plans should focus at least as much on the implementation and follow-through of project activities as on the planning and development of those activities. Results of implementation should be integrated throughout the organization into policies, job descriptions, and procedures. That helps to ensure continued implementation of activities. Focus on accountabilities. In project plans, include specific deliverables to be produced by your client during the project. If a deliverable is not produced when it's scheduled, then immediately discuss the situation with your client. Experienced consultants realize that it is their client who must continue to do the work if a project is to be successful. The moment that a client backs off from doing that work, the consultant and client need to have an authentic discussion about the situation. Focus on the process as much as on the final results. When focusing only on achieving the desired final results, you can forget other critically important aspects of the change process, such as the quality of your relationship with your client. If you and your client work authentically in a highly collaborative process focused on continued action and learning, the results that are really meant to occur will occur. Focus on learning during the change process. Learnings are how we verify what is working and what is not during a project. Remember, a major goal of your consulting activity should be for your clients to learn how to solve more of their own problems. Therefore, be sure to integrate opportunities for learning into your project plans. One of the best ways to ensure that your project always focuses on the most important activities is to have a well-designed project plan. In projects to accomplish significant change, that plan is often called a change management plan. Here are some useful suggestions about what to include in any change management plan. First, be sure to start developing a written change management plan. It should be developed collaboratively with your client. Ensure that it will be systematic, include overall goals, methods to achieve the goals, and methods to assess whether or not the goals are being achieved. Include the results of the following guidelines. Be sure to include some training for your client about the basics of the change process. Many clients do not understand organizational change. You need to help your client to understand the realities of the process that they're about to go through. Strive to include a comprehensive and integrated set of activities in the plan. Depending on the needs and preferences of your client, strive to go beyond simply providing a written report or a simple one-size-fits-all training. Instead, consider including pre-assessments, customized trainings, ongoing one-on-one coaching, facilitation of an overall change process, opportunities for participants to learn from each other in peer networks, as well as opportunities for participants to reflect on their own learning and post-assessments. Include pre- and post-assessments as benchmarks for change. In the middle of complex and dynamic change, you and your client need some consistent stakes in the ground. That is, some aspects of the project that are, at least for now, considered to be specific and stable. Assessments of the quality of various activities are useful during a project as a means to measure the progress of the project. They're also useful as a reference point around which you and your client can discuss the project. Include the key roles in the change, including the initiator of the change, a champion who provides enthusiasm and motivation during change, various change agents, people responsible to guide the change at different times, and the sponsor or official coordinator of the change. Include action plans with indicators and timelines. Work with your client to produce action plans that specify who is going to be doing what and by when. Include what resources will be needed. Resources are usually in terms of people, facilities, money, and supplies. It also helps at this point to remind your client that plans are simply guidelines. They can be changed if needed. During planning, be sure to manage expectations between you and your client. You can do this by collaboratively documenting the plan, the associated action plans, and the status of implementation. Use strong communication skills, especially listening skills, to ensure that you and your client are really hearing each other. Managing expectations may be one of your most important accomplishments because clients and their employees often have very high expectations during projects for change. Be sure to always acknowledge accomplishments. This component is often forgotten, yet it is one of the most important for ensuring realistic expectations, strong participation, and sustained momentum during a project. The way that you acknowledge and celebrate accomplishments should be according to the nature of your client's organization. One of the best ways to learn that nature is simply to ask your clients to explain it. Specify how the plans can be changed. Plans are rarely implemented as originally designed. It is permissible to change plans, but they should be changed in a systematic manner. It's becoming conventional wisdom that the majority of change efforts fail. However, many people dispute that claim. They question the research, for example. What does success mean? Was the research truly valid? And was the research limited to certain kinds of organizations? Now that we've discussed organizational change, It's very important to end by discussing what is success in organizational change. We'll review what we talked about in the CDI course, Standards, Principles, and Risks. Is success achieving the results listed in the contract? Both you and your client should specify the overall results that the project is to achieve in a written agreement. Describe them in terms that you both could readily detect during the project. Is success when the client's problem is solved? Sometimes, as you and your client work together, you both realize that there's a more important problem to address. In that case, be sure to document the newly desired results. Is success that the project finished on time and within budget? Often your client has very limited resources in terms of time and money. They might consider success to mean that the project finished on time and within budget, even if it didn't solve the client's actual problem. Is success that you and your client had a high-quality working relationship? You want your relationship with your client to be as open, honest, and trusting as possible. That kind of relationship keeps strong, ongoing commitment and participation in the project itself, which in turn are what's needed to solve your client's problem. Is success that your client learns to solve similar problems by themselves in the future? This outcome should be one of the major professional goals for any consultant. So in any project, involve your client in project activities so that they are more likely to learn to solve their own problems in the future. Is success that your client says that they'd hire you again? One of the most powerful outcomes of a project is that you are both willing to work with each other again. However, be careful about this. An ethical consideration for any professional consultant is to always avoid creating the client's ongoing dependency on the consult. Now's a good time to pause again and reflect on what you've heard. In your learning journal, answer the following questions. Which are your top 3 systems principles for change and why? What is your most important area for professional development that you've realized from watching this video? How did you come to that conclusion? Pause the video and give this some thought. Perhaps discuss these questions with peers and then write your answers in your journal. If you ever have any questions or want to share feedback during the series, simply send us an email at info@consultantsdevelopmentinstitute.org. And again, thank you so much for your time during this video.